Okay, brooms. What a boring topic. Brooms. Well, just to give you a little background, about 20 years ago, and I'll pass this around. About 20 years ago, I'm just going to tell you the whole story. We got all afternoon. So I had a couple classic cars that I was storing in a garage about 2 blocks south of my house. In a garage, and the lady that owned the house decided she's going to sell the house. Well, that put me in a bind because with the garages gone, I was going to have to find 2 extra garages for my cars. So after about 6 months, I finally made a bid on the house, and so I tell people I bought a 2-car garage and got a house with it. But anyway, in that house, when I looked at it, and at the time didn't mean much to me, was this picture. And it's a picture of the Jefferson Broom factory. So this house is at 406 South Elm. It's right across the street from what I call the South Grade School, where the superintendent used to be, the South Grade, where the young kids. So it's right across the street. So that's where it was. Now it's not the original house. The house was built in 1905, and this picture was taken in 1897. So this structure, when you see the picture, it's just kind of a shack, it looks like to me. It's just a structure that was built there to make brooms, and then it was torn down, and the house that sits there now was put up. So I'm going to pass this around. There's not much to see except all the guys on it. And somebody asked me, well, aren't there names on the back of the guys and stuff? And I said, no, there's not. So we had a little discussion. I think Margaret's going to talk about that a little bit, about the discussion among our Facebook people on the historical about where these broom fields were and some of the names of these guys. And so I think she's going to have some additional history about this picture as we go along. So just briefly, my little part of this. So the first reference of witches flying on brooms was 1453. So that's the first time you heard about brooms. There was a witch on it. The first broom was a gift to a wife so she could clean the house better. Okay? The modern broom making did not start until 1797. Brooms were made of broom corn, also known as sorghum, vulgar. The crop was used for animal feed. In the colonial times, brooms were made with a bundle of twigs tied together, or some straw tied together, or some shavings from a hickory stick tied together and used. Brooms are a symbol of good luck around the world. They sweep away bad fortune and protect against evil. In the early 1900s, the number of broom factories in the United States was over 1,000. Now, I think that's an awfully low number. Now, that might be official broom factories where probably every household made their own brooms. I have no idea. I'm just kind of thinking that, somebody in the house wanted something to sweep with, and they went out and got some official broom factories. So, in that broom factory that is pictured there in Jefferson, there was 10 men that worked. They made 240 brooms a day from 23 acres of broom corn. And I think Margaret's going to talk a little about where some of these fields might have been at the time. We've had some ongoing discussion on Facebook about this. So that's all I have, except I'm an educator, so I looked up this too. But in 2005, some guy by the name of Dan Jones wrote a Master of Arts thesis, so an MA thesis, on, here's his title, Broom Corn and Brooms, a history of broom corn cultivation and broom manufacturing in Iowa. So that's his thesis.
So he said, Dan was the broom maker at Living History Farms that taught me.
Oh, I should have made fun of him then. Thank you. One other thing, the museum officially opens again on May 1st. Okay.
Well, I don't think my portion of the talk is going to be as entertaining as Roger's, but I'm going to tell you some facts about brooms that I have found out. Brooms, the factory that Roger has a photo of is the Jefferson Broom Manufacturing Company. And brooms that they made were made from broom corn, as he said. And there's a story, which I don't know if this is true, Shannon may know otherwise because it's a story, that broom corn came to the U.S. with Benjamin Franklin. He brought an imported whisk broom that still had a seed attached. So he removed the seed and planted it. Soon he had lots of broom corn plants. It is a fact that by 1895 it was an important part of the U.S. economy. Broom corn was prevalent in New England, but it also grew in Iowa. In Greene County there were 23 acres in 1885, and it was a regular crop in the state in 1920. Following World War II, there was some interest in establishing broom corn as a staple crop in Iowa, but nothing came of it. It's grown today in the Thomas Jefferson Gardens. So if you want to see what broom corn looks like, you can go over there in the summer and they'll show you some. The Jefferson Broom Manufacturing Company, which is what Roger's photo is of, was founded by Herbert Pelton and George McCully in the 1880s. Its first site was 206 South Oak, and it was located in a building that had originally been a Presbyterian church and had been moved to that address. They produced about 20 dozen brooms a day. Jesse Bailey bought out McCully, and he and Herbert Pelton moved the business to Madison Street between Oak and Elm, which is where Roger's photo was taken. In 1898, Pelton and Bailey moved to Cedar Rapids, where they continued making brooms. But the Jefferson Broom Manufacturing Company remained in Jefferson. The company was purchased by Fred Bossert, A.M., who was known as Earl, head, and Clyde Eagleson at that time. It employed 8 people and made whisk brooms, broom brushes, and brooms for the home. Earl Head was president of the company. They added a power stitcher to the business, which allowed them to turn out work with greater ease and expedition. Their brooms were carried by all the merchants in town. The biggest danger facing the young company was fire, because broom corn is very inflammable. In April 1899, the business had 9 employees. 2 of them extinguished a fire that started when a bundle of broom corn ignited from a melting kettle. Nearly 50 pounds of broom corn were lost, but there wasn't a total loss of property. Just 8 months later, though, in December 1899, there was a huge fire in the afternoon, shortly after the dinner hour. It was spotted by a workman returning from lunch. He found the inside of the drying room on the east side of the building ablaze. $200 worth of finished brooms waiting for shipment burned, along with 2 tons of corn. Workers cut a hole through the west side of the main building and removed most of the machinery, some gasoline, and some finished and unfinished brooms. The loss was estimated at $1,250, and the insurance only paid $450, so there was a total loss of $800. Despite this loss, the company was determined to continue. It moved to the site of a blacksmith shop owned by Mr. A.T. Lohr, which was just west of the Luke blacksmith shop and across the street from the Washington Street stables. The Jefferson Broom Manufacturing Company owners were optimistic about this new location, which was central and convenient, and they were able to move their power stitcher there. Yet by 1901, they'd sold their business for $1,500 to Mr. H.E. Reaver, who previously had business interests in New York. Reaver hired another man, Ose White, as a traveling salesman, and the 2 men were constantly on the road selling brooms. Although the business was profitable, in 1902, Reaver decided he wanted to spend more time at home, so he sold the company to Mr. D. Talbot. Unfortunately, the company's life under Talbot was short. Another broom maker emerged, though. Clyde Shannon had started the Jefferson Broom Manufacturing Company at the age of 11 as a worker. In 1918, he and his mother moved onto a farm in the Horseshoe Bend area. Clyde had the owner of that farm plant 4 or 5 acres of broom corn for him. In the fall, he'd walk through the field and bend the rows of broom corn toward each other, about waist high. This made a bench, and when he cut the heads off the corn, he'd lay them across this bench to dry. These heads were gathered and held over a spinning drum to remove the seeds. They were then fashioned into brooms using sticks and wire that Clyde would order. People came from miles around to purchase Clyde's brooms, and he also peddled them from a horse and buggy. In 1924, the Bee said, Clyde Shannon of Kendrick Township was in Jefferson yesterday with some fine samples of broom corn, which he is raising there for broom making purposes. He tells the Bee he has enough this year to finish 125 dozen brooms, and that the quality this season is the best he has ever produced. Clyde is an old hand at this business, having conducted the broom factory in Jefferson for a number of years, and folks who buy his brooms can count on them being of the highest wearing quality. A year or 2 later, Shannon joined with R.W. Bennett to found the Jefferson Broom Factory, which was located near Winkleman Switch on the Bennett farm. They had 12 acres of broom corn, and they made 500 dozen brooms a year in 1927. 50% of their brooms were sold outside of Greene County. However, despite this success, the factory didn't continue, and its demise marked the end of broom making in the county. Shannon left the broom business, going on to a long career with the Jefferson Telephone Company. In the 1970s, the Lions Club sold brooms for $2 a piece as a fundraiser, but broom making itself was a thing of the past in Greene County, until today, when Shannon is going to show us a little bit about broom making.
I like to wander around while I talk a little bit, so at some point I'll come back over here, but I'm going to go wireless, I guess. Yeah, so like I said, my name is Shannon Bardole-Foley, so you can assume that with a name like Bardole, I'm related to a number of people in the room. So I'm related to all the Bardoles. My parents are Dick and Joe Bardole that live near Rippey. Although I grew up in Ogden, they have moved back here 11 years ago. Also joining me today is Mary Foley, my mother-in-law. She is joining us today from Dakota City, Iowa. But being in Greene County is a little bit like home because not only is my dad's side of the family from Greene County, my mom's parents lived in Greenbrier. This is probably the only place I can say Greenbrier, and you know where I'm talking about. And then they moved into Jefferson when I was a little kid. So I have very fond memories of being in Greene County. So thanks for inviting me back today. Where to start? So many things to tell you about. A little bit about my history in broom making goes back to when I was a very young child. And we took trips every year. Many of them around the state of Iowa, and my mother loves Iowa history, and we've been to every single museum in this whole state. And as a young child, I didn't love it. I always wanted to go on the other side of the ropes, and then the opportunity came. When I was in college, I was looking for a summer job, and Living History Farms was hiring. And I was hired on as an intern for that summer. And they had asked me in my interview, have you ever been to Living History Farms? Well, of course, I came with my third grade class, like every other third grader in the state of Iowa. But also, I came with my family, and I have this distinct memory of watching a broom being made. I was maybe 10 or so when we had that trip. And we walked into the broom shop, and we watched as the broom maker started from the very beginning of the process. He was making a whisk broom, and we watched every step of that process. So that means we were probably in there for maybe close to a half an hour. As other families came and went, they saw part of the process and then they move on. But we were really interested, and we watched that whole thing. And we got all the way done, and we said, can we buy that one? And you know, my mom and dad still have that broom at their house. And you can believe that after I learned how to make a whisk broom, I was like, let me see that one. Looks a little different than mine. That's okay. That's okay. I don't know if that is why they put me in the broom shop, but they put me in the broom shop. At the time, the broom shop was in the back half of the cabinet maker shop, which is where I got to know Robbie Peterson. So I worked at Living History Farms for a little while, and then I left there, and I thought, you know, I love making brooms. That might be the weirdest thing you hear somebody say today. I love making brooms. I can keep doing this. But it's not like you just find this stuff anywhere, right? So there was a email group for broom makers, because that exists. And I found that group, and I joined that group, and there was a couple in south central Nebraska, a little town by the name of Franklin. And they had been doing some excavating on their property, and they came across this stuff. But not this as you see it. They came across this piece, and this piece, and those pieces. This actually kind of looked like this. The wood was rotted off down at the bottom. But like parts and pieces, how did they even know what it was? But they did or they found out and they were looking to sell it. So I called my dad and said, Dad, can I borrow your truck? And so I drove to South Central Nebraska and picked up parts and pieces. And then I called my good friend Robbie, and Robbie at the time was in Story City. And I said, Robbie, I need to build a broom making machine. And he's totally the right guy to go to because first of all, he's an oldie-timey woodworker, but second of all, he actually knows how this is supposed to work. Now, Robbie could probably stand here today and tell you all the same things that I'm telling you. You just would not see him make a broom because he never learned how to do that. Similarly, I could go stand in his wood shop and tell you all about it, but I'm not going to make anything for you. When you spend that much time in a shop together, you kind of learn what the other person has to say. So Robbie actually, so he helped me, and when I say he helped me, he would say, okay, this is how this saw works, you go do it. So when I say that I built this, I did, under the close supervision of people who knew what they were doing. So Robbie helped me to start to refinish this. Now, there's a little bit of a problem. If you're missing a piece, which I was, it's not like you just go run to Menards and buy a new piece. So cool thing, I have the great big wheel. For those of you who are up close, I have this big wheel down here on the bottom that's got kind of a sprocket on it. The big problem with that big sprocket wheel is that I needed to find a chain. And it took me a long time to find that chain because it's not a standard chain. So I finally found the chain, like we're in business now, but now I need to find the little sprocket to match the big sprocket. And I happened to, this was when I was living in Ames, I was working another job, and it was my job to take the fire extinguishers to get them recharged. And I walked into this place with my fire extinguisher in hand, and I'm like, hey, you have sprockets? And they're like, yeah, because they're a machine supply store. Of course they have sprockets, but like I don't go to the machine supply store, so I was just excited maybe they have the sprocket that I need. I said, so I'm looking for a sprocket. They're like, great, what size is your chain? And I said, number 33, and they're like, oh. What do you mean, oh? Well, they're like, that's not a standard size. Well, can you, Anyway, they found somebody who would machine me a sprocket. And once I knew I had that sprocket, we were on the way. It took me 7 years start to finish to put all this together. Keep in mind that at least 5.5 years of that was like being frustrated not finding parts, and so I just stopped working on it for a while. And then I would come back to it later. So we were able to get all of these parts and pieces put back together. So that's, I don't know, a big part of the story is just being able to bring it back to life. I've been able to share some photos with some other broom makers, and I was always nervous to do this because, I don't know, like broom makers are kind of judgy people. Not me, of course. But I had seen where other broom makers had posted something and somebody would be, well, that's not what it's called, or, whatever. And I just thought, I'm nervous to share this because I know it's not 100% historically accurate. It can't be. I just didn't have all the parts and pieces. But I showed the broom makers and they approved, so that was a good feeling. I want to make a broom for you today so you can see how it all works. I didn't drag it all here just for you to look at it. So I'm going to show you how it works. But before I show you how it works, I want to tell you about the types of brooms that we make and what we make them out of. So for starters, we do use broom corn, just like was mentioned. I can tell you that probably the most recent large patch of broom corn, not just a little bit grown in the gardens here, I approve, by the way, but we did actually grow some of this on my family's Century farm not all too long ago. And here's what I can tell you about that experience. There was no question where it was planted. It was planted right beside the field corn, and initially it looks very much like field corn, up until the point that it doesn't anymore. It looks very much like the stalk. It never grows an ear. It is sorghum. But what makes it look so different than the field corn is how tall it grows. This stuff can grow up to 15 feet tall. So it's very much taller than your average field corn. Also, this is what the tassel looks like. I'm not going to pass these around because the seeds are going to fall off. But if you want to come up and look at it afterwards, I would love to have you do that and just get an idea. You can kind of see, though, if you look past the seeds that are on there, there are the bristles of the broom. So I've got, maybe 7 or so tassels here. Imagine how many of those it takes to make an entire broom. So it was fascinating to hear about how many acres of broom corn were grown here. Also, the other comment I wanted to make about the 1,000 or so, whatever it was, broom factories, I think that's a low number because I can tell you that a lot of small towns had a broom factory. And it may not have employed a huge number of people like a factory. Did this just go out? Sorry.
No,
Let's just set it down. I can talk loud. Can you hear me okay? All right. A lot of little towns had broom factories. And so even a lot of little towns in Iowa, so I would think 1,000 would actually be fairly a low number because Iowa was not exporting brooms to all over the country. I think a lot of little towns in a lot of states all around had broom factories. But broom corn was going to be the primary material that was used. We do buy a lot of it in because after we grew a patch of broom corn a couple of different years, it's a lot of work to harvest it. To this day, there has never been anything invented to harvest it. It is all harvested by hand. And the process of harvesting it, like I said, it grows up to 15 feet tall. This short kid is not going to just reach up there and clip the top off. So there's a process by which you fold the rows down across each other like this. It's called tabling. Then the tassels stick out on the end, and then you come through with your pruning shears and trim those off. Then you're going to hang them to dry. Once they're dry, after a few weeks, then you have to strip all the seeds off, and then you have to size the broom corn because you don't want broom corn this size and this size going into one broom. So it's very labor intensive to grow, harvest, and process. Well, the growing is maybe the easy part. It's the harvesting and processing. That's the more time-consuming part. So we don't really grow it. We do order a lot of that in. Commercially today, a lot of it is grown in Mexico. So we make two different types of brooms. We make round brooms and we make flat brooms. The round brooms are a little more simple. This is a hearth broom. Hearth broom used to sweep the ashes away from your fireplace. This one people like because it's pretty. It's got the fancy weaving down here on the bottom. Now this little one is my absolutely favorite broom to use. It's called a cake tester broom. A cake tester broom is used like this. You pull out one bristle, and that's what you stick in your cake to see if it's done. So you don't have to clean with it, and when you're done using it, you get to eat cake. We make three types of flat brooms. This is a little bit bigger than the typical house broom that I make. This was the broom that I made for my husband when we first started dating almost 9 years ago. Not bad for a 9-year-old broom. This broom survived a construction crew when we were building our new house. I figured if the construction crew couldn't fill it, then it must have a good long life ahead of it. My broom that I use in my house is almost 21 years old. If I can say so, I think it's a well-constructed broom. I will say it is also probably not used as much as it should be. But also, it is stored properly, and that is one thing that is going to make your broom last longer. This is one appropriate way to store your broom. Handle on the floor, bristles leaning evenly against the wall. The other appropriate way to store your broom is to hang it up on the wall. The worst way to store your broom is the way that most of us store our brooms, which is bristles down on the floor. It's going to bend your bristles and wear your broom out faster. This is the house broom, though, of course, used to sweep the house. Smaller version of the same thing, the child's broom. I don't have children in my house, but I like this broom. I leave this in my bathroom because this is too big to sweep behind the toilet, and I don't want to get on my hands and knees to use this one. So this one's my bathroom broom. But mostly a kid's broom, mostly. This one is the whisk broom. Of course, so many purposes for the whisk broom. This is probably what I sell the most of. But, you know, I use it around the kitty litter, of course. we have one of these out in the wood shop to sweep the, any of the wood shaving sawdust off of the workbench. You use it when you're sweeping into the dustpan. But one day, my dad and I were out, we used to do a lot of craft shows, and we'd take the broom making equipment out, and I had a guy who bought 2 whisk brooms. And I always ask people, what are you doing with your whisk broom? Because there's so many things you can do with them. I said, why do you need 2? And he said, well, one for each tractor. Silly me. But then I looked at my dad and I said, why would he need it in his tractor? And he had to explain to me that my grandpa, Paul Bardole, if any of you knew him, Grandpa always had a whisk broom in his car to sweep off his floor mats. So,
Absolutely. Yeah. Yes.
okay, are you ready to see how this works? All right, first thing you need to know is shortly after we arrived, they said, Dad, can you please go fill my bucket of water? And so these bristles, broomcorn bristles, have been sitting in a bucket of water. I hope I'm not giving you a bath up here in the front. And there's a good reason those have to get soaked. We're about ready to put those bristles onto the handle, and the wire is going to hold it on. And that wire is just tight enough that if we wrap those bristles dry, they could break off. And so by making them pliable, it makes it bend while we're manipulating that broom corn. I'm going to make a child's broom. That's one of the faster flat brooms to make, so that's why I picked that one. But it's pretty similar to how you make all the flat brooms. That was just a little piece of leather that I wrapped around the broom handle, and that just helps to prevent that handle from getting scarred up by the vise. The chuck. This is not a broom chuck. This is a lathe chuck. It's the wrong piece, but I couldn't find a broom chuck at the time. So we went with the lathe chuck. That just prevents the handle from getting too banged up. So like any sort of trade, all trades have got their tools that are a little bit different. This one is a broom maker's hammer, and after this is all done and over, I would invite you to come up and take a closer look at some of these. This is surprisingly heavy for its size, and it doesn't really look like a hammer. So the flat side here is going to be used to do what you do with hammers, which is pound nails. The sharper side, this is not sharp like a knife, but this is what we're going to use to pound the wire, and I'll show you that in just a moment. So stay tuned while I pound this nail in. It's always a good day when I'm making brooms if I don't snap my fingers. So we'll hope today's a good one. All right, so this is basically just how we're attaching the wire to the handle so that we can wrap the bristles in there.
And you didn't bend the nail.
Not this time. All right. So as you can see, it's really a fairly simple machine. As my foot moves this, kicks this wheel around, it's turning the large sprocket, which turns the chain, which turns the little sprocket, which turns the shaft that's holding the broom handle. That was a lot to explain, but just watch all the parts, and it really makes a lot of sense. The nice thing about this being a simple machine is that just in case something doesn't work, I always know how to fix it. The same is true of, say, my treadle sewing machine, because I have kind of that sort of soul that likes a treadle sewing machine. I've always been able to fix it. If my electric sewing machine goes down, I'm in trouble. But this one, definitely fixable. So what we're going to do is we're going to add layer after layer to this broom. This broom is going to get 7 layers of bristles, and we start by putting the wet side of the bristles between the wire and the handle. As the wheel gets turned around, the bristles just wrap right in. This is where we're going to take the sharper side of that hammer and hit the wire. What that does is it holds the bristles down to the handle that much tighter. The first 3 layers all go on the same way, just nice and even around the handle. Now you'll notice I'm wearing a long sleeve shirt today. That's not just because it's a little bit cool outside. It's because if you work with broom corn for a long period of time, it will give you a rash on your arms. You're not, as you're sweeping with a broom like this, you're probably never handling the broom corn. But it's no fun to have itchy arms all day after making brooms. First 3 layers have gone on. The 4th layer is going to look very different. This layer of the broom is called the shoulders. And much like your shoulders, right, it's the widest part of your body. The shoulders are what gives the broom its width. So we're going to add, instead of wrapping them evenly around the handle, we're going to add just a little bit on either side there. So again, we're not wrapping evenly. That whole half of the layer went on one side, the other half goes, of course, right across from it. All right, I already promised him I was going to clean the floor when I'm done, so don't panic. I'm about to make a mess. In order to put the last of the bristles on, we're just going to trim the bottom off here. So one of the nice things about my broom making equipment being out of my shop is I finally got to sweep my floor today. Because you can imagine, you see the bristles falling down underneath of there right now. Imagine after I have made about 100 brooms what that looks like. And that's probably the last time I swept my floor.
How often do you have to sharpen your knife?
Probably more than I actually do. I try to give it a little hone probably every time that I use it. Broom corn is a little bit rough on blades. So try to keep it sharp. The duller the blade, of course, the more difficult to use. I've taught a lot of people how to make brooms, and that piece right there, cutting the broom corn, that's the part that everybody struggles with the most. And it was probably what I struggled the most with as well to get good at, because it's hard to explain exactly how to do that. Okay, so the last 3 layers look very similar to the first 3 layers, where they're going to go on nice and even around the handle. Now, if we were making a round broom, we would have skipped that shoulders step. We don't put shoulders on a round broom, it's just round. This is what we need to make that broom flat. Also, this is a good reason why those bristles get soaked in water, because I just bent that broom corn up to a 90-degree angle. That certainly would have broken. Now, when I worked at Living History Farms and we gave school tours to lots of little kids, and I'd always say, doesn't this look like a bad hair day? This is what my hair looked like when I woke up this morning. And do you know what I do when I have a bad hair day? I just pull it back in a hair tie, and the bad hair day goes away. So you might notice there's a lot of wire going into here. For each layer, I wrap that wire 3 times around. So imagine that larger house broom there. There's about 10 feet of wire inside of that broom.
Did you use wire when you worked at Living History?
I did, yep, so the town part of the museum there was showing 1876.
Okay.
And the nice thing about that was that the Industrial Revolution had happened by that point, so you're starting to see mass production happening. So you're able to get things like that mass-produced wire, nails, all those kinds of things. You weren't having to make your own broom handles, that sort of thing. So the 1870s, moving forward, is a good time to be a broom maker. Oh, one other thing that you said, you talked about modern broom making started in the late 1700s. I think that what it means by modern is that prior to this machine being invented, this is where we're going to flatten that broom and give us a wide, flat sweeping surface. Prior to the invention of this, all brooms were round, and they were about this big around. And you can imagine sweeping your floor, how long that would take compared to that wide sweeping surface. So I think that's probably the modern.
That's what I meant to say.
Yes. All right, this is the last layer that's going to go on this broom. So we're going to start the process of finishing this broom off, which means that we got to get that wire back off the handle. We're going to place 2 different nails. I'm going to start with this one first. On these brooms, see there's two wraps of wire on there. That's really just helping to hold your broom all together. We can stop at this one, but if we give it that extra one, it's just going to give us a little bit more strength and durability to that broom. So but you don't see where that wire goes in between. I'm going to hide that wire, and then we're going to pop it out just to do that last wrap of wire in there. Now, one of the other things that Roger talked about was the 10 men who worked in the broom factory. And I don't know if you caught that. It was all men that worked in the broom factory, and that was pretty common. This was man's work. I guess at Living History Farms, they decided us girls could do it too. Whatever, it was fine. I liked it. There were a few lady broom makers, not too many. Most of the broom makers were men. Now, also what that means is that I spent the first couple of years of my broom making career doing this in a dress. And you know, I haven't made a broom wearing a dress in a long time, and I probably never will again. Nail is what's going to secure that wire to the handle, and then we'll be able to take the broom out of this machine. Just a little more mess, I promise. Only a little. Now, one thing that you're probably noticing about this broom is that it is still pretty round in shape. So the next step is that we're going to take it over to the sewing vise where we press it flat. Unfortunately, that's all the sewing vise does. All it does is hold your broom. It's just a vise. All the stitching has to be done by hand. I promise it doesn't take too long though. I guess I got to put my signature on my broom too. So I told you we got a lot of this equipment from Franklin, Nebraska, and often a broom shop in a town was called a Broom Works and was named after the town that it was in. And I was really putting all this together when I lived in Ames, and I didn't want to call it Ames Broom Work. What if I left? I did. I'm glad I didn't call it that. But I wanted to retain a little bit of the history of where I came from, so my broom making business is called Franklin Broom Works. So the sewing vise was really a great invention then. This was supposedly invented by the Shakers. The Shakers, being a religious people, thought that sweeping the floor took much too long, and if they could just find a way to make that a broader sweeping surface, they could spend less time cleaning their homes and more time in prayer and in their religious practices. So it was actually the Shakers that we can thank for this wonderful invention. One of the great things about this particular sewing vise is that sewing vices, when they were initially manufactured, you could make one size of broom. I can't make, the next broom I make is not going to be exactly the same size. It's just not. So I can't imagine the consistency you would have to have as you were binding brooms. So this was a great thing. You can adapt these jaws here up. They go out, they go in. So all of these very different sizes of brooms can be sewn right here on this machine. This one's also kind of cool too. If you, again, when you want to come up later and look at this, if I tell you that this is patented September 10th, 1878, you might be able to make that out. I don't believe it's actually from 1878 because of course something can be patented and you use that patent for a long time. But I do believe that probably all the metalworks on here are probably well over 100 years old. All right, so we're going to sew up this broom. I'm sure we have some sewers in the room. What do we need to sew with? Thread and a needle, right? Okay, so we're going to use two different types of needles. This is the first one we're going to use. This is for a child's broom or a whisk broom. If I was going to make a house broom, we would use this one instead. What you'll notice, there's a hole right in the center and the double point here, and that's what's going to serve as an anchor to hold our thread inside the broom. All right, your next needle that you're going to use. This is your sewing needle, right? Hole in one end and pointy on the other end, just like any other sewing needle you might use. We're going to do a simple figure 8 stitch where we go underneath on one side to over top on the next side. We're simply going under and over the string there. We're not going to go under and over the needle. You don't want to stitch the needle into the broom. Sorry, this is not the most exciting step of the process, but it does go pretty quickly. Now, you'll notice that on the house broom, there's 3 rows of stitching. On the children's, on the whisk broom, there's only 2 rows of stitching. Because they're smaller brooms, they don't need as many rows. Now, we are able to custom make some brooms. That might sound kind of silly. What can you customize about a broom? Well, let me give you this example. If you go visit my good friend Robbie over at RVP 1875, you will find all of his brooms stored the wrong way. But also, he knows when I've been there because all his brooms are flipped upside down, like they should be. But one of the things, so he's working with not sawdust, but wood shavings. And so he needs a very wide sweeping surface. He needs a very flexible sweeping surface. So I make his brooms extra wide, and we only put 2 rows of stitching in to make them more flexible. So there are different ways we can customize brooms a little bit differently. One of my other favorite custom brooms that I made, my brother, when he was heading to college, said, "Can you make me a kid-sized broom, but on an adult-sized handle?" Okay, so this is now forever known as the dorm broom, which I have made for some nephews and other folks. Also, that's great in a camper as well, because it's, just a little smaller to be able to store in that space. Oh, I just used this without telling you what I was doing. This is the broom maker's thimble. Okay, so your thimble goes either on your thumb or your finger, right? And you use it so you don't poke yourself with your needle. Well, big needle, big thimble. That's all I used it for, was to push that out. But gosh, isn't that an important tool to have?
Yeah.
This one is actually a pretty cool piece. I don't know if you can tell, that circle there in the middle is metal. We actually found this piece in Nebraska as well, except the leather, of course, was in terrible shape. I found a leather worker that I said, just pull that apart, remake it for me, put that same metal piece in there. So this is an exact reproduction of the old one, just made with new leather. So the second row of stitching really goes on just about the same as the first. The only thing that's different is that we're not going to follow the stitches straight up and down, because otherwise you would end up getting cracks in your bristles up here, and then you'd leave lines of dirt on the floor. So instead, we're just going to offset from the stitches on the prior row. So with this machine, I think I had mentioned before, this one was actually intact pretty well when I found it, other than kind of the legs were rotted off down at the bottom. So that was really cool though, because then what we could do is take measurements off of it and basically redesign it exactly. So the wood that we got here is a white oak, and each one of those legs, I bet, weighs 60 pounds. They were heavy. It was heavy just trying to, manipulate those around just to be able to get it set up. But thankfully, when we do move this equipment around, everything that needs to go on wheels can go on wheels. So this moves on a 2-wheel dolly. And then my dad is a piano guy, and he used to move a lot of pianos. So he had a couple of piano moving dollies, and he kind of got out of the piano moving business and didn't need 2 sets of dollies. So now one of his piano movers is what moves this machine right over here. It's good to know guys like that.
So how many rooms do you make in a day?
How many could I make in a day?
How many do you make in a day?
Well, last week I probably made 8
8 in a week.
in a day. I probably made 8 one day last week. Kind of depends on what size of broom you're talking about. I'll tell you what, I don't do a lot of real hardcore production. Also, I don't make brooms as fast as I used to. When I did it all day, every day, got real good at it and made them real fast. Also, the more I talk, the slower I work. But start to finish, a house broom like this takes about 40 minutes. Anybody set their timer? Anybody know how long this one took? I think these are right around half an hour, maybe-ish, or a little less, I suppose. All right. Anybody step of this broom making process is going to be. There it goes. Okay, we're going to bring it over to what looks like a great big paper cutter. Again, I promised I would clean the floor, don't worry. Okay, so this cutter, we assume that it also is well over 100 years old, and sometimes it doesn't work exactly as good as it's supposed to, but if I get to be over 100 years old and work that good, I'm not going to complain about it. So, start to finish, there's child's broom. Now, I hope that maybe you can see what my family thought was so interesting and why we stood and watched that whole whisk broom being made, because, I don't know, I thought it was kind of an interesting process even as a kid. So, anyway, that's how to make a broom. Does anybody have any questions about anything? Yeah.
How are brooms made today? How are they manufactured?
Well, the good ones are made this way.
Those terrible ones that we all find that don't work.
You could go to any box store and you can buy something labeled a corn broom, right? It's probably made by a machine somewhere. It's going to cost you $10 and you're going to need to replace it in 2 years, maybe. So I think that modern ways, I think they're just manufactured mechanically. I don't really know too much about it. Once in a while, you can find a really for real broom maker and buy you one that'll last you 20 years though. So I was very worried one time. We used to always do the Oktoberfest in Ogden, and there was a guy who bought a broom, and 2 years later he came back and he said, I need to replace my broom. And I said, why? Is there something wrong with it? And he said, no, I've been sweeping my sidewalk with it. I'm like, oh, well, that'll wear it down. Yeah, sidewalk will definitely wear it down.
So do you go around doing craft shows?
Say that again?
Do you go around doing craft shows?
We used to more than we do now. So the newer thing in my world, my husband and I have been married for almost 6 years, and he's a beekeeper. And so we have kind of the honey side of our business. So we have a little farm store at our property. So we do a lot more sales out of our property than we do traveling this stuff around. Really glad to be here today. Also, I don't really love taking this stuff out every weekend. It's a lot to move around, so. What did you say?
Tell about Grandma's broom.
So another way that we can customize a broom. I was working in the broom shop at Living History Farms when my grandma Jean Taylor, who lived here in Jefferson, when she turned 80, and Grandma's birthday was on Halloween. So of course she was always teased about being a witch, having been born on Halloween. And so my mom said, can you make Grandma a witch's broom for her 80th birthday? So I said, sure. So I started with the hearth broom design, and so it kind of looks like that, and we make it a little bit more raggedy, but anyway, just kind of another fun way that we can customize a broom. So after Grandma passed, my mom said, I think you should probably have your broom back. So that was on display at my broom shop at home. So, yeah.
The other thing is, I was just going to say, and I'm just interrupting to say that Shannon said that some of the brooms are for sale. So if anybody would like to buy one of the brooms that's back there, you can do that.
How much are each of the brooms? That's a good question. I brought my sign because I don't remember. I wish I could sell them to you for that $2 price. Sorry about that. The house brooms are 30. The children's brooms are 15. Whisk brooms are 10. Hearth brooms are 12. And cake testers are 5. I did not come to sell brooms, but if you want to buy a broom, I will sell one to you. We can take cash, check, or card.
Where is your farm? Do you sell the honey?
We are between Des Moines and Indianola, so we're a little ways away. Yeah.
Did you bring brooms to sell today, or
I sure did.
does it have to be done through your...
No, you can come buy a broom before you leave today.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Are these, did you make this for your height, or is this the height that?
No, this is the height that it really is.
I kid you a lot, but I'm just asking.
for me, but it was funny because when we were getting ready to build it, I said it's this tall. Because I stood behind this machine a lot, so I could say it's this tall. I know how big this one's supposed to be, but nope, that's legit what size it is supposed to be. Yes?
Just curious, is that always the same size gauge of wire, or I'm thinking 100 years ago, wire and wire today is?
Sure.
Okay.
This is, I forget, 17 or 18. It's kind of an odd gauge. You can't just go to Fleet Farm and buy this gauge of wire. I think it's probably similar. I guess I'm not 100% sure, but I think it's probably similar to what was being used.
You broke it by twisting
Yeah.
rather than clippers?
Right? That's the gauge of wire that you have. It's strong enough to hold your broom together, but it's not so strong because you know you're creating friction. It heats up, but yeah, you can just bend it back and forth and break it right off. Sometimes when I have kids in my broom shop, I'll be like, "Hey, you want to come break something?" and let them break that wire off. That's all it's good. Well, I would love to keep chatting with you. And also, if you have places to go, please go those places. But if you want to come and take a closer look at any of the equipment, the broom corn, the tools, the brooms, any of that, please feel free to come on up, and I'll be here for a little bit yet. And yeah. Oh my gosh, how did I forget that? Thanks. Okay, so one more quick thing, I promise. So I told you that we grew some broom corn on our family's Century Farm not too long ago. And the problem with broom corn is you might notice there's a lot of seed on these. And so we have a lot of seed. And if you ever want to maybe try growing some broom corn, we have some seed that I would love to give to you. It is our gift to you. It comes complete with instructions on how to grow it. I make no guarantees how well it will germinate. I believe some of it will and some of it won't because that's seeds, right? But if you would like some broom corn to try to grow some at home, I think my dad will be up here and he can help bag you up some broom corn, but please just take the broom corn away.
And if we run out, I know where to get more. I've got a 55-gallon drum at my house, a 25-gallon wastebasket, and 2 totes with more.
And if you don't know him, this is Dick Bardole, and he is the museum's piano tuner. And he suggested this program, so we owe him for it. Thank you.
How do you